Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. This is Fred Lauder-Parisa, the National District Export Council Chair for the Education and Outreach Committee. Before I do my brief introduction, I just want to quickly talk to you a little bit what the National Association of District Export Council is. We represent approximately 1,500 members across 50 states. The unique part about this, each and every one of them is appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. We provide advisories just like myself and Tom, and we do webinars, we do counseling, and we provide these type of webinars on a regular basis on that. So with that, I'm delighted and honored to present our keynote speaker, Mr. Thomas Cook. Tom and I have worked for many years together. We were in Canada on the US, Mexico, Canada agreement as speakers. So those are just one of the many things that we work together and collaborate. Tom is a managing director of Blue Tiger International, and it's an international business consultancy advising on supply chain management, trade compliance, purchasing, trade, and disruption management, and global business and logistics. Tom was a former CEO of American River International in New Jersey and Apex Global Logistic Supply Chains operation in LA, or Louisiana could be. Tom has over 35 years of experience. He started very young, I see, in assessing companies all over the world, managing their import and export operation. He's also a member of the New York District Export Council and serves on the board of directors of the National Association of District Export Councils. Tom is also director of the National Institute of World Trade Organization, a 30-year-old education and training organization based in New Jersey. So you could see he's been around for a while. Both Blue Tiger International and the National Institute of World are strategic partners of the United States Department of Commerce. Tom has authored over 20 books on global trade, the latest scheduled for publication in fall 2025, entitled Managing and Mitigating the Impact of Tariffs, Pandemics, and Trade Disruptions in the Global Supply Chain. I want to add something very special about Tom. We've been friends for a while. This month, November 11th, the Marine Corps celebrated 250 years. And the reason I mention that, Tom is a veteran of the Marine Corps. So Tom, with that, thank you so much for your service to all of us, and of course, your service to the U.S. exporters. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Thomas Cook.
Fred, thank you very much. And Heidi, thank you for all you do. You're great at setting these things up and working on behalf of all our export community. And Fred, for everything that you do as well for the both import and export community and the business community in general is always much appreciated. So enough with the introductions. Let's get to the meat of the conversation here. So all of us involved in supply chain now are kind of caught up in the little bit of the chaos and the disruption and what I call unprecedented uncertainty caused by our administration and so forth. And what I want to make sure everybody understands are what we perceive Trump's goals and processes are, and then talk about solutions. Even with all this chaos and disruption and unprecedented uncertainty, Trump has goals which are meritorious. What he's looking to do is to create reciprocal tariffs around the world. Trump believes that here we are in the United States, we're the defenders of freedom all over the world. We give significant amounts of our money and resources to countries all around the world. And yet, if Germany was to sell a car manufactured in Germany in the United States, when that car comes through the border in the United States, they would pay a 2.5% duty rate. But if General Motors wanted to sell a Chevrolet Camaro in Germany, they'd have to pay a 17.5% duty rate when it crossed into Germany. And that unequal balance exists all over the world for all kinds of products. And Trump is aggressively taking a position with all these countries around the world that enough is enough. And he's gone after every one of them aggressively. And he's using tariffs as a strategy in the negotiations. And the reality is that in the information that we've received is that more than 100 countries around the world have already offered to lower their duty rates on US exports into those countries. And that's good news for every one of us, right? And we already know that about 35 to 40 agreements are already in place, okay? Where there are trade agreements in place and lower duties and all kinds of agreements on the exchange of various products, services between the United States and those countries and vice versa. His second goal was that he's sitting back saying to companies all around the world and countries around the world, well, if you're going to buy $25 billion worth of farm equipment, then we want you to go to John Deere or Caterpillar or other companies that are located here in the United States to buy those products, okay, rather than going to China or other countries that might produce these products. So depending upon where you figure the tab is, Trump has got commitments of more than $1 trillion already of foreign companies buying things here in the United States or building factories or making direct investments in the United States. So while there's a tremendous amount of chaos and disruption, there's actually a good side to this whole sidearm, which is that these countries are falling in line. It helps us make the United States more competitive in the export market. And I'm always a believer that commodities that are grown here, okay, and the industrial complex that we have that makes things is all in demand all around the world because we can produce a really quality product and we can offer great terms and conditions. And there is no customer service anywhere in the world that's as good as we have here in the United States. So these things are all positive that are involved. But for those of us that are involved in importing and exporting, we have to deal with these tariffs that are in place now and what's going on in the world. So again, we have now trade deals in place with Great Britain, which happened to be the first country to line up, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Guatemala, Ecuador, just to name a few. And there's a total of over 35 countries now that have fallen into place and are negotiating with President and the team at Department of Commerce in the International Trade Administration. And there are now huge product sales of US products in the agricultural community, energy, education, military, and aviation products, along with a host of other industries, are all getting benefit from all these trade deals and so forth. It's unfortunate that the press downplays some of the positive sides that are happening here, but if you're paying attention to the detail that's available, you really can see there's a kind of a balancing act that's taking place between what the administration is doing against the problems, against what now are the benefits. So, as Fred said, I've been doing this for a long time. I always joke around that, yeah, I was running a fork truck at about 5 years old many years ago. So I started in this business early on. But in the last 30 years, we have worked hard and we have developed in that time frame 20 solutions for customers to look at in terms of mitigating the impact of tariffs. So appreciate that in international business, there are challenges that we face every day, okay, depending upon where we buy from or where we ship to. Geopolitical issues we face every day. Economic issues that we face every day. Wars and terrorism, right? Just think about what's happened in the Middle East over the last few years, where you have these terrorists operating in Yemen that are actually bombing ships that come through the Strait of Hormuz, that are cutting through to the Suez Canal, coming to and from the west and coming to and from the east. And that's been cut off now for almost 3 years, okay? And I just saw in the news the other day that there's now two major commercial vessels have come through the straits successfully. And a lot of that has to do with our president creating a pretty aggressive stance towards the Houthis that are in Yemen that are the problem in this regard. But appreciate the fact that we're impacted by this because ships had to go around Africa, going to and from Europe and the West to Asia. And that's added anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks of transit time and added anywhere from $300 to $400 of additional cost in moving the goods internationally. And when you're moving hundreds of containers, if not thousands of containers, that adds up. Weather issues, particularly climate change, is impacting things all over the world and here in the United States. Hazards of international shipping that exist all the time. As Fred said, I served both in the military, but I also served in the Merchant Marine. I went to the Merchant Marine Academy and I sailed on various types of vessels. And I can tell you for sure, one of the reasons there's officers on those ships is to deal with all the hazards that you face moving a ship full of cargo from point A to point B. And we have a lot of bad players in international trade that try to swindle us every day that we have to be careful of. Scams and schemes that are in our face. And lastly, U.S. Customs themselves become a much more difficult entity for us to deal with, particularly since February when President is using tariffs and U.S. Customs as a tool to negotiate global trade. And also for those of us that export, particularly when we sell goods overseas, we have to always remember that we have always a customs clearance on the other side. It may be the responsibility of our customer, but we know we're facilitating it not only with the product that we're selling, but the documentation that's used to clear the goods in that country overseas. So resilience and sustainability, which is what's threatened and what every company is trying to achieve, in order to get there, culturally, we have to change that. One, we have to pivot quickly. We have to be able to develop resources, numerous resources, okay? And that's one of the things that I think is important about NADEC is that not only at a national level, but where they serve locally all over the United States, they're a resource to help companies with any issues involved in international trade. And they have a direct line into the Department of Commerce, the International Trade Administration, which has resources all over the world to help facilitate information flow and things happening in foreign countries. Okay. So in order to pivot quickly, we have to be informed, and the resources that we develop help us become informed. And we have to be creative and diligent on the solutions that we apply. And appreciate the fact that with all these new trade deals, okay, the door is opening up for US exports, where they were prohibited in some countries because in some cases there was as much as 15, 20, or 30% duty rate on the US product going into that country that now is down to a 10 or 15% level, which makes it a much more favorable sell. And a lot of our customers, we've seen about an uptick of almost 15 to 20% in their export sales over the last 4 months. A lot of it has to do with the trade deals that are in place. But appreciate the fact that many exporters in the United States, okay, that come from USA manufacturing and assembly facilities depend upon a certain amount of raw materials and components and parts, along with what they purchase in the United States in raw material parts and components, to combine these things to make a product that's for export sale. So while a company might be principally involved in exporting, importing has a huge impact on its cost model, its ability to be competitive. And when all of a sudden we're paying a 4.5% duty rate on a raw material import, and now they're paying a 50% duty rate on that, that could be pretty severe. Okay, so there's a huge impact in the relationship between imports and exports. So with increased import tariffs, there's a direct impact on our export competitiveness. Another challenge that we have to deal with. So over all these years, as a team, we've slowly created solutions, and we make these solutions very valuable to the public. And anybody who's on this call today is always welcome to reach into us. And as a favor to NADEC, we will provide a 2-hour consultation on any one of these topics for free to help a company kind of get an idea of what options they might have and where they could go to get support and help, because there are a lot of resources that Natick has available, and there are a lot of Fred and a lot of Parisas who are in our structure that have a lot of knowledge and experience that we all who volunteer for this service share with our constituents. So I'm going to go down this list, but I'm going to focus on a number of these because we only have so much time in this webinar. So foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses, tariff engineering, drawback programs, freight consolidation, demand planning programs, intensive operations training resources, direct shipping, alternative and near sourcing, choice of the Incoterms, utilization of technology, import versus export, free trade agreements, warehousing, distribution, comprehensive, robust landed cost modeling, robust supply chain assessments, bringing in guidance and expertise concerning trade compliance management with import and export regulations, the first sale option, HTS alterations, the harmonized tariff system, parts versus finished products coming in, and domestic intermediaries, the use of them. So how we navigate providing what solutions a company could use in its import-export supply chain starts with us creating what we call a landed cost model. This one looks as an import transaction, but it works just the same way for an export transaction. So the first silo is the negotiation that takes place with a supplier. And if we were selling, it would be the negotiation with the buyer. Okay. On the acquisition cost or the sales price that we charge for a customer overseas. The freight from moving it from point A to point B, and as always, appreciate that international freight is expensive and can be a huge part of the competitiveness of the transaction. Then when it arrives here in the United States or overseas, there's a customs clearance responsibility, and there's a cost associated with that, okay, or costs, plural. And then the government's going to want to collect duties and taxes, okay? Duties and taxes help fund the government's operations. And just as an interesting point, in the United States in 1789, once the Constitutional Convention was convened and we were now a nation going forward, the first government agency that was formed was U.S. Customs. And if you walk into a U.S. Customs office today in any area of the United States, you'll see a sign over the door that says the first U.S. government agency. They're very proud about that because as a fledgling nation, we needed to get revenue in order to do what we needed to do as a country. So duties and taxes was set up through customs to collect those monies and flow that into the government. And lastly is that we have to do distribution and fulfillment when goods arrive overseas or they come into the United States, come in generally into a warehouse or a manufacturing or assembly location where it gets further completed into a finished product, and then it gets distributed and fulfilled into final destinations, which are usually anywhere within that country or region. Costs are associated with all those transactions. So we've set up a 4-step process, and this can mirror for yourselves in your own evaluation of risk and spend, as we do a very detailed assessment at a granular level of understanding how a supply chain operates both on import and export sales and purchasing. From that intensive review, we benchmark it to like and similar companies, and we can come up with recommendations of what improvements could be made that will have a return on the investment. And that's the second part of the second step, which is to create a financial model to show what costs are involved in implementing a recommendation and what is going to be the ROI on that recommendation. Once we get past those first 2 steps, the step that really requires a lot more time involved is the operational model, okay? Where we work with all the different silos in a company from purchasing, sales, customer service, logistics, legal, finance, and so forth, to answer the question, what do we have to do differently in our business model to make this recommendation work? Okay. And then once we get through those first 3 steps, okay, we then get into implementation, which is making it happen. So as a general statement, we're asked a lot of times, well, how long does this process take? And it depends. We've done this process within 2 weeks, and it's taken as much as a year to do this process. It depends. But the average amount of time to go from zero to implementation is anywhere from 60 to 90 days. And depending upon other circumstances, could be as much as 120 to 140 days in terms of how long it takes. So it can happen pretty quickly. When I say pivot quickly, these options give us the ability to make change reasonably quickly in a supply chain. So one of the first options that we have is bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones. In both of these situations, both allow companies to import things into their country. And when they pass through the border, there's no obligation to do a customs clearance, and therefore no obligation to pay duties and taxes until the goods exit those facilities. So a bonded warehouse can hold up goods for 5 years, can only hold uncleared international freight, and you can repack, remark, reweigh, do quality control, but in a bonded warehouse, you cannot materially change the product. Okay, so if it comes in as a widget, it's got to go out as a widget. Foreign trade zone, which has a lot of the same attributes as the bonded warehouse, allows goods to come in, and you have an unlimited amount of time before those goods leave that facility. In either the bonded or the foreign trade zone, any goods that are exported from the United States, okay, no duty is paid. So the perfect example of a bonded or foreign trade zone, it might take in goods to a company, and they may or may not do any work on it, but they bring some goods into the United States as an import. That's when duty would pay. But they might also export some of their merchandise up to Canada or down to Mexico or to the Caribbean. Okay. Those goods, no duty would be obligated to be paid because those goods would never have entered the US economy. So the foreign trade zone, the bonded warehouse, allows this deferral of the duty, and on goods that get exported from those facilities, it eliminates the duty. But the big difference between a foreign trade zone and a bonded warehouse not only is the unlimited amount of time it can be kept in there, but is that we're allowed to do manipulation of the product. We're allowed to take chemicals in and create a finished product. We can take parts of a car, bring them together and make an automobile in a foreign trade zone. As a matter of fact, almost all the car manufacturers assemble in foreign trade zones in the United States, where they import parts and components from all over the world and use US labor on US soil in a foreign trade zone to assemble the car, now entering it into the United States. Okay. So foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses are tools that we can use both on the import side and the export side to handle and provide benefit. We can also use these things on our export activity. For a medical products company here in New York, I just did a bonded warehouse for this company in Italy. So it has a tremendous amount of European export sales. When it sells its customers, it gives them the ability to ship the goods by air, and they can deliver in 2 or 3 days, or by ocean freight, and they can deliver in 30 to 45 days. But what we did was we pre-positioned 6 months worth of freight in a foreign trade zone in Italy. So the goods get transferred by container using the longer period of time, the less experienced mode of ocean freight. And then they supply their clients in Europe through that foreign trade zone, and they don't have to pay any VAT or any duty into the European country until the goods exit the facility. And if they're holding inventory for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they get the cash flow advantage similar to how it would work here in the United States. So bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones aren't unique to the United States, and they're available for us to use and pre-position our freight in our export sales. In this particular company that was medical products, they now have improved their customer service because they can now make a delivery the same day in certain circumstances and the very next day in most other circumstances all throughout Europe by pre-positioning inventory there. And remember, they have the ability to move it there by ocean freight, the lower cost of transportation, and they get the advantage of deferring the VAT and the duty payment until it exits the facility and point of sale to the customer. Huge advantages. These things can be used domestically or internationally. So I have a client that's based in Baltimore, and they import $100 million of raw petroleum products from overseas. You're looking at a picture of their facility right there along the Delaware. They can hold product up to 9 months before the sale because they buy a whole vessel's amount of cargo, which is not as much as they need at any point in time, but they will consume over a 9-month period. Okay. So they can buy and get a discount by buying a full vessel load of petroleum product, but put it into a facility where they're not paying duty until the point of sale. So we created an FTZ at their terminal. Okay. The annual cost of running that FTZ is about 165,000. Most of that expense was on a technology to manage the inventory, and their savings are in excess of $3.4 million annually. Again, focusing on that ROI. And we're just now setting up in Brussels, in Belgium, a facility that's going to take LNG product from a U.S. supplier in Texas. Okay, so that they can pre-position the LNG in a foreign trade zone there, not having to pay VAT or duty until they create the point of sale. So they can move it in bulk in large vessels that carry that type of cargo, okay, and then transfer it to these tanks. It's reversed in an export transaction. On the import side, and appreciate that this also could work on the export side because there are countries around the world, particularly in Europe, that operates on the same basis of what's called the first sale option. So the perfect example here is a company that might buy from China, that they are dealing with a factory in China, but what they don't realize is that the factory is using a selling agent in the relationship to the US supplier. And that selling agent is taking a commission or a fee on that transaction. And the US company is providing an FOB value declared to customs when the goods enter the United States. And in that value is the fee paid to the intermediary buying or selling agent. US Customs has a program that says, hey, if you can evidence to us that you have an intermediary involved, all we're concerned about is the value that's being paid to the factory and not the value paid through an intermediary. So we have cases where we can lower the value declared to US Customs on an import transaction anywhere from 5, 10, 15% to as much as 50% in some cases of what that intermediary is collecting. So there's a lot of opportunity for savings, as in this example. Okay. You're going to pay the supplier 155,000. The commission to the buying agent is 10%. So you could declare to customs 139,500. There's a 50% duty rate in this case, so the savings per transaction is 7,500. If this company had 30 shipments annually, the savings would be around $232,000, which is a fair amount of money, right? And appreciate that on the export side, there are a lot of countries that work the same way, if in fact there's an intermediary buying agent or selling agent here in the United States. So tariff engineering is something that's a little bit more uh, complicated and a little bit more intensive. But the concept is that there are two things that determine what duty rates are everywhere around the world. Where does the product come from, its source or its origin, and what is it? And what it is the harmonized tariff number. And how we determine the harmonized tariff number, every country around the world have what's called general rules of interpretation, in which they tell importers into that country, here's how you classify products. And we have that here in the United States, how you classify products. What determines classification of products is what its essential character is, what is it made of, what it's going to be used for. All these things come into play in determining that. So part of what makes it up is what is it made of? What materials is it made of? What ingredients that are in it will also influence what the HTS number is. So I have engineers on our team, and our engineers work with our client engineers and with technical and R&D people, because if we can alter an ingredient or a particular metal or something that's used in the manufacturing process, we can dramatically impact the HTS number and therefore impact the amount of duty that's paid to customs here or overseas. Trump's got these 232 tariffs, which is on steel, aluminum, and copper, which the tariffs can, depending upon which the country is and how it's layered, could go anywhere from 25% all the way up to 150%. And it means that if any raw steel, aluminum, or copper come in from overseas, these tariffs apply, or also derivatives, which means if there's steel, aluminum, or copper used in the manufacturing process, then that percentage has to be declared separately and a additional duty on that amount of money. So our engineers will work with a supplier, and as an example, we're working with a company that does some industrial goods in upstate New York, and we're now changing uh, some of the copper that's used in their industrial products to a different alloy that works just as well. Okay, so it's not surcharged. And in the use of steel in some of its product, we're using a composite plastic product, okay, which eliminates the additional duty on the steel. And we did testing on these products after they did the molding and everything like that, and it's actually working out pretty good. So the ability to change something in the ingredients or the manufacturing process has a direct impact on duty. And this concept also works in our sales to foreign countries around the world. I don't want to say every country around the world has tariff engineering exemptions, but most of the countries that adopt Western world principles do. So when we ship internationally, we generally ship either by air or we ship by ocean. If we're shipping to Canada or Mexico, we might use rail or trucking, but those are exemptions. 95% of what we buy and sell come from other countries around the world. So air freight and ocean freight becomes our primary modes. When we look at air freight, which is a much more expensive way of moving things, air freight will cost as much as 18 times more expensive than ocean freight on a per kilo or per cubic meter basis. Okay. So when we go into a company and we're doing an analysis, we'll get a payables run from their accounting department and see how much money they're spending on air freight versus ocean freight. And if they're buying more than 5% of their total spend in air freight, that raises a red flag to us, and we start to question that as to why is that happening. In almost 90% of the cases, it's happening because somebody in purchasing or sourcing has not communicated timely to the supplier overseas what they actually need, and therefore they produce the business quickly and they ship it quickly using air freight to move it because it's going to be late otherwise. So you sit back and say, well, why is that happening? And what we really look at is the demand planning process of the importer and their communication system to their suppliers. Are they talking as responsibly and as thoroughly as they can? Are they using a technology that helps them manage the demand planning process? Because there are a lot of technologies which have streamlined purchasing and can be used very successfully at managing the demand planning requirements. And we focus on the demand planning so that we can eliminate the use of expedited or air freight services. And as a general statement, we do about maybe 45 to 50 projects a year, specifically focusing on this area of freight. And we average anywhere from 15 to 20% savings on their freight costs. So appreciate the fact that the duty might add 15% of additional cost, But if we can create a system of reducing their freight by 20%, we can offset the impact of that additional duty rate. Remember, we're always looking at a landed cost model, those different silos of where we can get savings that impact our overall landed cost, which downplays the additional duties that we may or may not be paying.
Um, Tom, you have a couple of questions in the chat, and one of them has to do with landed cost.
Okay. Can you read them to me? Would that be all right?
Sure. The first one, can you clarify what is meant by landed cost? In your slide, you include taxes in the upper portion, which I take to include IVA tax, but taxes are omitted in the lower portion of the slide. Landed cost is a term much in use but little understood and agreed upon, unlike the Incoterms.
Right. So let's just qualify what was said. The landed cost is a generic conversation that gets customized to the individual needs of particular supply chains, and appreciate that there are always nuances in everybody's supply chains that changes it once from one to another. What we define as landed cost is those 5 silos and anything that you have to have as a cost against moving the goods from point A to point B, right? So the first silo is the acquisition cost, what we pay for the merchandise, okay? The second silo is freight. Those are constants that are going to happen. Then the next one is the customs clearance. You're always going to have a customs clearance process. There's always going to be a charge for it, okay? The next is duty and taxes. What we're talking about in duties and taxes here is the goods paid to the customs of the country that you're sending the goods to, or here coming into the United States. It's those duties and taxes that are applicable to the import process. We're not talking about any other taxes that might be paid to the IRS for transactions and so forth like that. We're talking about the duties and financial obligations paid to U.S. Customs here on an import, or to the foreign customs that's overseas. And appreciate that overseas, you also would have VAT, or the value added tax, or like in Canada, it's called GST, General Services Tax. So you have other duties and tax obligations all around the world. Mexico, Pidamentos would be the name of it there, and so forth. So it does carry some different names in there, but that would be included. And then the last aspect is that most companies will import something into their country, overseas or here. They'll warehouse it. They might do further assembly or processing to it, and then they ship it to a final customer. So we build that cost of that shipment to the final customer because they're located somewhere. Okay. And a perfect example would be a case study that we did for a company in Baltimore a couple of years back, is they were importing 100% of everything they sold in the United States. And the demographics of their sales in the United States was all over the United States. And they provided same day, next day, and 3-day services. And they contracted with trucking companies and UPS to make those deliveries. They included the cost of the transportation in their cost of goods sold. So they paid the trucking companies and UPS for the freight services. So we did a demographic study of their distribution in the United States, and we found that they had as many clients west of the Mississippi as they had east of the Mississippi, but it cost them almost twice as much to ship to west of the Mississippi than it did east of the Mississippi. So in a collaborative analysis, we said to them, you really should position freight west of the Mississippi. And in this case, we set up a secondary distribution facility in Reno, Nevada. And from that Reno, Nevada, they now fulfilled all their orders to the west of the Mississippi clients, and they reduced their internal transportation costs by about 22% a year. They actually had about $8 million worth of expense. So we saved them about $1.6 million on their costs by setting up a secondary distribution facility and so forth. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question. Remember, each supply chain, there are different variables, but those are constants. So when we say duties and taxes, we're talking about the amount paid to the government as the good passes through the border.
Okay.
Next question.
Next question. On the slide discussing the Baltimore Fuel Company, you mentioned that we, in quotes, created an FTZ. For clarification, does that mean the NADEC has a role in creating FTZs?
NADEC does not have a role in creating FTZs. Individual importers and exporters and service providers, freight forwarders, custom house brokers, 3PLs, all have the ability to set up foreign trade zones. But most of them use the support of consultants or trade attorneys or people who are experts in those areas to help them facilitate the whole process of thinking through whether it makes sense and the application process, because there are elements of security, compliance, and product accountability that have to be addressed. NADEC's role, I can't speak specifically for NADEC, is to basically advocate programs that provide benefits to all its constituents. So NADEC would be a circumstance of people advocating for the use of foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses to help all the constituents and clients and the people who participate in NADEC to get a better deal on their import and export activity.
Yes. And that's all for now.
Okay. So the same thing as in this example where there was $87,000 of savings and so forth. Okay. So another option for companies, but this really relates more to the import side than it does to the export side, is that part of what our president is trying to do is to reopen the ability for companies in the United States to do their own manufacturing and not rely so heavily on importing. And always appreciate that COVID taught the United States and all the companies that are involved in international trade a huge lesson that there were significant vulnerabilities established on such a strong dependence on China or singular sourcing anywhere in the world. So a lot of companies out of COVID established a risk management strategy where they created multiple sources in different countries around the world and also here in the United States, so they wouldn't be solely dependent on any one particular country because of the vulnerabilities that were established in the Trump first administration, through COVID when that happened, and now in Trump's second administration, where certain vulnerabilities have also occurred. So friendshoring is bringing the manufacturing back to a country where we have a friendlier relationship. So if you're talking about moving it from China, it might be going to South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, India, Indonesia, countries like that. Nearshoring is bringing the manufacturing back to closer to the United States, such as Canada, Mexico, or the Caribbean. And reshoring is really bringing it back to the United States. And any one of these things are a risk management strategy and impact importers' vulnerability on the dependence on single sourcing around the world. About 6% of manufacturing since Trump's first administration has returned, and that gets dependent upon which source of information you use to get it. But one of the reliable sources that we use has told us it's about 6%. And most of that has been in critical areas where a lot of vulnerabilities were identified through the COVID period. But general manufacturing has yet to really bulldoze back to the United States. And part of the reason for that is that we have a shortage of really blue-collar skilled labor to work in these factories. The foreign trade zone model, which I talked about earlier, is a great model for reshoring and bringing back manufacturing. And we can set up a financial model to justify it, but trying to staff it with solid blue-collar skilled labor is a challenge in most markets. And if you divided the United States in half, north of the Mason-Dixon line, it's more difficult than it is south of the Mason-Dixon line because there's more skilled blue-collar labor in our southern states than there are in our northern states. So reshoring has to be looked at very carefully because you don't want to open up a manufacturing capability if you can't provide the support and help to do it. I read just yesterday the CEO of Ford making a huge point of kind of complaining to the publicist who was interviewing him about the fact that Ford is struggling right now to get quality mechanics into all their shops all around the country and into some of the plants where they use experienced blue collar mechanics. And I know as a fact that there are other car companies and other industrial product companies that are also impacted by that same issue. So here's a client that we had, this was in New Jersey, and they imported oil additive from China. And they saw their increases from when Trump first came into office to today, which rose from 15 to 25 to 50% more in the duty rate that they were paying. So we found an alternative supplier in a Mexican maquiladora program in a contract manufacturing location. The acquisition cost of the product was 7% higher than China, but there was a lower cost in the other four pillars of the landed cost, being freight, demand planning process, okay, no duty paid because the goods were coming into the United States under the USMCA agreement. The products qualified for that. So overall, it was still a favorable choice to move it to Mexico. And just to mention for a moment is that back in the early 1990s, the administration along with Mexico created the maquiladora program in Mexico, which was really an immigration strategy. How are we going to reduce the amount of Mexican immigrants coming into the United States, particularly men who were seeking blue collar jobs in the United States that they couldn't get in Mexico? So the idea was to establish a program in Mexico that would open up factories in Mexico, paying good wages for Mexicans to work at. And that program, actually going back to the early 1990s, has actually been a very successful program, and almost 1.6 million Mexicans are working in that capacity as skilled blue collar labor in these maquiladora factories. It's a 50-mile swath of land along the California down to the Texas border, and any contract manufacturers or Mexican manufacturers, US or foreign manufacturers that could set up both assembly facilities and manufacturing facilities there gets these benefits. And it's actually a duty elimination program rather than even a mitigation program, because those factories, when they import raw materials and components with the intent of shipping it to the United States as a finished product, there's no duty when it enters Mexico, or Pidamentos as it's called there. Domestic intermediary. So this program, it can be used both for imports and exports. I'll give you the example as an import is a company is selling to the United States directly industrial equipment, but it has in the United States a sales office that does some customer service and maintenance of that equipment. But the sale goes directly from the foreign manufacturer to the US buyer, which means when the goods cross the border, the transaction value includes their profit. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that the profit is 40%. So in that profit, they're paying 40% more duty to the federal government than they need to. Because what we do is create a transfer pricing issue where they can transfer it at the wholesale price to their US subsidiary, 40% less, pay 40% less duty, and then ship it as a sale from the US company to now the US buyer. Yes, they will incur a tax to their IRS on that sale, but they have expenses to offset that, and it will still provide a lower cost of their overall supply chain by doing it with that methodology than the other way around. And we've done the same thing in reverse on shipment sales to Germany and to the Netherlands over the years, where it's very similar doing the thing where the US sells to a US-based subsidiary in those countries at the wholesale price and then creates a local tax on the sale, but it's much lower than it would be otherwise. So one particular case, we had a client that was transferring product into the United States. It had a 42% markup, so it's paying 42% more duty when it comes through the border. They had $250 million in export sales, and they saved $17 million in duty, okay, because they had savings because they now move the goods to the first sale entity into the intermediary. And what happens now is that, yes, it has a tax obligation to the federal government and possibly to the state, depending on which state they're in, okay? But you have a net savings of $14.5 million. It's a huge number on $250 million in sales. It's a great program. It's available not only here in the United States, but also around the world. We'd like to also add some things that we need to be concerned about, both as an importer and exporter, is that Trump is changing the culture of U.S. customs. And I always appreciate that most people think of U.S. customs as an import agency, but it's also an export agency. In every gateway around the United States, customs has export enforcement officers as well, who represent the various U.S. government agencies that have oversight over exports, but don't have the manpower or the bandwidth to cover it at the local gateways. So they outsource it to customs, which has the manpower. Customs culture is changing because Trump is saying they're no more longer trade facilitators. Okay. They are now enforcement agents of the Department of Treasury or Departments of Commerce or Departments of Treasury or Departments of State. Okay. And they're very concerned about, both on the import side and the export side, the documentation, particularly commercial invoices and packing lists, what the valuations that are used in those transfers, what's showing as the origin of the goods, and what's being used as the HTS number. And in more cases than not, particularly on imports into the United States, customs is asking for a bill of materials. And the bill of materials, they want to see a line item of what materials are utilized to manufacture this product overseas, what countries those materials come from, and what the percentage is against the total. Okay. And the reason they're doing that is that customs is coming after companies. And the perfect example is companies that buy from Vietnam and Mexico. And China, through COVID, many times moved some of their manufacturing plants to Vietnam and to Mexico, and then shipped from Vietnam and Mexico, saying that was made in Mexico and Vietnam. And customs is now asking for bill of materials by saying that all it is a shell company using Chinese materials to make the product in Vietnam or Mexico. So customs is asking for the bill of materials because what they want the importer to evidence is that there's a predominance value of Vietnamese content or Mexican content, so that they can then say made in Vietnam or made in Mexico, as compared to circumstances where there's no predominance of that value add in Mexico or Vietnam. And we're seeing more of these cases coming in, and the media of customs is putting this out, that they're looking at this thing. And more concerning to us is that executive orders have been signed that customs, both on the import and export side, is to work with a task force of Department of Homeland Security enforcement officers with a number of Department of Justice attorneys, looking for where there's false information on the documentation on goods coming into the United States or goods leaving the United States. Just early this morning, I had a call from a brand new client that I have out in Colorado who said that they were being requested by their customer in China to lower the value on a invoice that they were going to be sending with the product leaving Colorado going to China. They said they would transfer the actual amount, but they wanted the US company to show a lower amount on that commercial invoice. And obviously that's a problem and you can't do that. You can't help a foreign individual defraud their government of the proper amount of duties that are due. The same thing here in the United States, a foreign seller can't help the US company defraud the US government. There's this reciprocity in these rules and regulations. But the concern is that this task force of DHS and DOJ is coming aggressively after both importers and exporters where there are issues either on valuation, origin, HTS, and bills of materials that are used in determining some of the factors that are involved in determining classification. So the culture of the agents are changing. And if you go to the customs website, you can see that they're hiring literally thousands of new officers. They're putting them in through these expedited training programs and putting them out in field stations to help assist a greater degree of checking the goods that are coming into the United States and those that are leaving. So some of the things that I want you to focus on relative to the export side of this equation is focus on lower duty countries. You can go to the Department of Commerce's website where there are now trade agreements that have been developed, and you can focus on those countries. I mentioned some of them earlier: Great Britain, okay, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Guatemala, Ecuador are just a few of about 36 countries where there are trade agreements already in place. And remember, there's another 70 countries in which that's being negotiated. Trump prioritized a lot of the countries that we have, a lot of trade with or have a lot to gain or lose. Focus on key export products. U.S. products manufactured here and agricultural products and raw materials that come from us are in great demand all around the world. Energy products is leading the charge. Aviation products, okay? Products that are used in food manufacturing, raw materials and components, okay? All these things are. And you can get statistics. The Census Bureau, part of the Department of Commerce, you can get through the USIACs, the U.S. Export Assistance Centers. You can gain a lot of information as to what is selling from the United States and what's in high demand around the world, because there's a lot of things that are available here in the United States. And while some people would say our costs are higher, it gets traded off with the quality of our transportation infrastructure, which is second to none, and the quality of our customer service, which is second to none. Focus on countries committed, working with the administration and the news media you can follow to see which ones are fighting with us and which ones are falling in line. Focus on positioning that inventory. What I talked about, where if you have a regular flow of exports overseas, you can position freight in a foreign trade zone or a bonded warehouse overseas, so you can quickly make deliveries overseas and provide a higher degree of customer service to your customers in those foreign countries. And you can do it by a regional basis, like one I mentioned where Italy is covering all of Europe, or you could do one in Vietnam, which covers all of Asia, or one in Singapore that covers all of Asia. You could do one in Brazil that covers all of Latin America, as an example. So there's all these kind of options that are example. Focus on offering terms, right? If you have the ability to offer terms, that could be a big differentiator between companies around the world that are looking to be paid upfront for their export sales. Okay. And appreciate the fact that if you didn't want to create a foreign receivable, there are ways to ensure that receivable, which you add an incremental cost to the transaction, but you're protected in the event that you don't get paid. And lastly is work with the commercial service. In almost every gateway around the United States in over 100 cities, there are commercial services offices called USIACs. There's a whole facility available in Washington. And when you talk about NADEC, we work in collaboration with all these offices around the world, and you can approach NADEC to make introductions for you to the commercial service and to help you navigate what services that they have. They have great services in finding buyers overseas. They have great services in making introductions for you and helping you manage contracts and a relationship with a potential foreign buyer. They also have all these trade missions that also go overseas to different parts of the world, which you can join and have them make introductions to you, set up meetings and so forth. They have a service called the Gold Key, which actually helps you make introductions and provides you very specific guidance in your specific transaction. So I wanted to share with you one particular case study on the export side. I had a clothing manufacturer and distributor about almost 2 years ago that came to us, and they imported a small percentage of their materials, but they exported about 30% of their manufactured products. So there was a predominance of US value content in their manufacturing process. So we established an FTZ at their main manufacturing and distribution location in North Carolina. So that meant as they imported whatever materials and components to help make them manufacture, that they received no duty upon coming in, and they only paid duty as the goods exited the facility. They had a 6-month lead time, so they had a 6-month cash flow advantage. It was huge. Okay. So there was savings on their import landed costs. We worked with the commercial service in North Carolina and another state and our global network on a broad-based global procurement review. We got a study of what their product sales were in about 20 different countries around the world, which allowed us to target market which countries we're going to focus on. So we narrowed down the scope to 3 areas and 5 different countries. We also identified value and customization of their products and pivoted quickly to that capability. Meaning they started to make, branding of the product to the companies that they were selling to, where they put their label on the product. As long as they sold the product, they didn't care whether they had another label on it. So after 18 months of when we started the product, we increased their sales by 7%. Any company would be happy to do that. And after 20 months, we included their export sales by 17%, which was obviously a huge amount of benefit. They're now looking to get into military wear as we identified the overseas need and the export opportunity. Apparently, a lot of the companies that they sold their clothing to asked them if they had various types of military wear that they could sell that would be sold to quasi-government agencies in their country. So we're in the middle of doing that analysis now and seeing how that can be done. And there literally are across the table with the USIACs and the district export councils, literally hundreds of these types of studies where as a group we help facilitate these type of arrangements around the world. So in summary, understanding how resilience and sustainability can be achieved through all these discussion points. Appreciate that culture in your organization starts from the top and it drives the approach down. So it's important to have buy-in from senior management. The approach is really a risk management concept, particularly for both importers and exporters and how they approach their foreign purchasing and their foreign sales. Okay. There are 20 plus solutions here that can be utilized to help you mitigate the impact of tariffs. And lastly, we subscribe to the culture of stop chasing cost and really chase what's obtaining the best value for your spend. Somebody offers you something for $100, don't try to negotiate it to 90, try to get more for the $100 and give them the $100, get more for that spend, get more value in the transaction. And there's lots of ways to negotiate that. On a positive note, since COVID, the elevation of the supply chain and the supply chain manager has increased dramatically. Through COVID, supply chain became a household word, And now through the administration and all the changes that they're making, supply chain is again at the heightened relevancy in all companies and its importance. And I think that's a real value add, that supply chain has increased its importance in organizations, and supply chain managers have increased their importance in organizations. So with all these challenges and risks comes opportunity to those that seek to find solutions, see success where others see problems and despair. This is an attitude adjustment. Diligence, persuasiveness, and creativity trump chaos and disruption, and appreciate that there are tremendous export opportunities, and particularly that Trump has opened the door with creating all these countries around the world that have lowered their duty rates on US product sales into those countries. So appreciate that I represent three important entities to you, which is the District Export Council of New York, which I sit on, and I also represent the Northeast region on NADEC. So you have NADEC, which is the national organization. You have the local district export councils, which represent all over the country. And then you have the U.S. Commercial Service, part of the International Trade Administration, which have personnel available in cities and their USEACs, U.S. Export Assistance Centers. They have people in Washington available, and they place people all around the world in the embassies and consulates to help U.S. companies navigate communications and the challenges of dealing with these countries around the world. And while the Trump administration, to a certain extent, has depleted the number of those offices in the commercial service, they're still thriving and they're still working pretty aggressively to provide still a high level of service. So these are great sources for you to utilize going forward. So with that, I appreciate everybody's kind attention. And if there are any more questions, Heidi, just let me know and I'll respond to them.
I did have one question. How can we get help with our AI offerings and smart contracts? We are doing contracts overseas now. I just mentioned that we did hear from KYG the other day.
Right.
That
So the commercial service and the high-ranking management team, which we interface with, and I just sat in a briefing in Portland, Oregon, and I sat in a secondary briefing for the region of the middle states in New England. And the Undersecretary of Commerce made the point that technology is a big focus of the Department of Commerce, and they have resources to help companies deal with technology information and technology capability and so forth. So I think you need to go to your local district export council, your local USEAC, and the Department of Commerce, and they have all kinds of numerous resources that are available to you that talk about how AI can be used in the import responsibility and also in the export responsibility. I would tell you that we used AI recently where we had close to 100,000 pieces of information that were very detailed to try to look for the needle in the haystack. And AI, what would have taken us several weeks to go through, AI in the course of 3 hours was able to screen all the information we had and give us the 5 or 6 names we were looking for using AI as a resource to cull through information and pinpoint what we provided as parameters. So it's a very important aspect of management today to use those and so forth. So Department of Commerce, your local USEACs or the local district export councils, and all that information is available on the internet. And you have my information looking right in front of you. Anybody on this call is welcome to reach in, and I'll be more than happy to point you in directions of where you can get support and assistance and so forth. Fred is also part of that sourcing and so forth, and Heidi, who is on the call as well. All of us can help you find resources available to you.
Yes, and we've gone a little bit over time, so I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut it off now. But there's going to be a survey that'll pop up when the webinar closes. If y'all wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to answer that, we'd sure appreciate it. And we will see y'all again in January with the next webinar. And we'll be sure to let you know what that is and when it will be. All righty. Thank you very much.